Yeah, well, thank you as well for organizing this. This is a wonderful honor to be part of. Well, I think what got me interested in environmental education is just the fact that our well-being is inextricably linked to the environment or to nature. So while we know that information won't necessarily lead to behavior change, a deeper understanding of these environmental issues provides people with the necessary tools to engage in behavioral in behavior that leads either to mitigating the negative threats to the environment or I guess leading to positive outcomes to the environment. So I think that's what really got me interested in environmental education. And also environmental education inspires people, right? So the images of tiger cubs playing or these birds doing these crazy mating dances, pandas sneezing, elephants swimming, you know, and it just understanding these synergistic behaviors between these different species, like that's I guess it touches all our heart and it generates support for environmental protection. So that's what really drives me.
Thank you, Morena. Amrutha?
Oh, I think she's muted. Trishala, could you please unmute? Yeah.
Huh. Hi, sorry guys. Thank you, Krithi and Ishika, for getting me onto this panel. I'm really excited. It's my first webinar, so very, very special and happy to be here. I was a teacher when I started off my journey into this education space. I taught in a government school, and I taught grade 2 and grade 3. And I taught the urban poor. And I think my journey with environmental education started with teaching them a subject called EVS in our Indian curriculum, you know. And honestly, I grew up learning from the same textbooks, but it wasn't enough. There's so much more to the whole scope of environmental education, and I've been trying to bring that into my current work at Mekshala, where I help design curriculum and content, and we take that to government schools and train teachers on how to teach about environment, not as a subject, but more as a concept across subjects. So yeah, I'm really excited to be doing what I do and learning as I go along.
Thank you. Ishika?
I think I'm probably the newest to this field on this panel, but in terms of where the interest came from, I think it started with a real urgency and want to communicate whatever I was doing and whatever I enjoyed doing. And so it started out more as outreach for conservation issues and things like that. And because of my engagement with CWS, it's taken on a bit more of an academic role as well. So I think now I understand environmental education a lot better, and it also takes me back to my school days where I realized, you know, in a way it's a little serendipitous that I ended up in the field of wildlife, considering how much our EVS in school lacked. So I think it's also an opportunity to, you know, try and fix some of that. Like I want to be able to do environmental education in the way I wish I had it in school, which I didn't. So yeah, it's kind of just, you know, like you learn so much about wildlife when you're in the field, and it's just this absolute urge to share it with the world. So I think that's where the interest comes from.
Fantastic. And I think everything that all of you have said today kind of captures the need and the urgency to which this, I think, environmental education addresses in terms of the massive environmental challenges we face on so many different issues around the world. And to get more people, particularly young children, to care about the environment and start to act rather than disengage as adults that we see most of the time. So I'm hoping everything that all of you are involved in, and we'll talk about examples as well, really gets into what's worked, what's not worked. But to start with, I'd like to ask Martha, how would you define environmental education? And, you know, what do you think constitutes good or impactful environmental education?
Sure. I've got a screen. I'll try to share. Oh, I can't do that. Never mind. Okay, I'll just talk. Environmental education was defined in the global sense back in 1977. And that definition is a common one, and it's good for lots of people to get started from. And you're right, there's many different variations of definitions based on what's important in a nation, how an education system is organized. But the international definition is a good place to start, because everybody can realize that there's a common denominator there. And basically that definition says that environmental education includes awareness and knowledge. People need information. We don't just make up things. We need to know. But it also recognizes, as Morena said, that knowledge isn't enough. And so there's a component of environmental education that includes attitudes, and another component that includes skills. And those skills can be related to the environment, like water testing or bird identification, but they can also be related to how we want people to go about solving problems. So communication skills and problem-solving skills and group facilitation skills, negotiation, collaboration, all those things that people need to learn to work together and to work together on solving a problem. The final objective is participation. And that means that environmental education includes opportunities for people to participate in solving environmental problems. So again, it's going to be age dependent. So what's good for 6-year-old children isn't going to be the same thing that's appropriate for 18-year-old students. But in that age appropriateness, opportunities to explore the local community, to understand what people want, what people don't want, what problems people see, could be related to water quality, could be related to biodiversity. In the United States right now, it might be related to security and police brutality. And that's part of the environment. That's part of what's motivating people to care. And so environmental education can include those topics too.
Great, thank you. I just want to briefly mention that we're getting questions coming in, but our request is that we have some question to ask the panelists, and then we'll address specific interesting questions at the very end. So please hold on and keep adding your questions to this as we move along. So given that definition, Morena, do you think we can actually define something as being effective when there's so much complexity to what we're trying to accomplish with environmental education?
Oh, absolutely. Because I guess if you can figure out an environmental program could have lots of different goals. So if you can figure out what goals you're trying to achieve through your environmental education, you don't need to achieve every single goal associated to environmental education within one program. But yeah, if you can define what your goal is, then you can define how you're progressing towards that goal by your actions, right? So absolutely.
Great. And to add to this, Ishika and Amrutha, I'd just like to understand, we talk about environmental education, and most of us who studied in India would say that the EVS subject that was taught was very poorly taught, or taught in a way that wouldn't inspire most people to get into any field in environmental education. So how do you think that would link back to what both Amrutha and Morena said? Because we all work in very different countries with very different resources.
I think going back to Martha's point around awareness, I think we have to start with that at the school level. Awareness about environment, about opportunities that exist, vocational work that is possible around these areas. And these are some places that, education plays the key role in. I don't know, anything else, Ishika?
Ishika?
So, no, I definitely agree. I think one thing that's great about the topic itself of the environment, about animals, ecosystems, plants, those kind of things, is that uh, the natural world is something that most people, especially younger people, have a very innate curiosity for. So it's very, I think we have half our work almost done for us as long as we have the right approach to a lot of contexts, because it's easy to tap into the empathetic side of people when there is a natural curiosity for the environment. I think something that we've been trying to do through the education program with Wild Chalet is try to also complement what is being taught in the EVS textbooks in schools, because it's not that the EVS textbooks aren't good in itself, so much that it's not taught in the best possible way. It's usually a very interesting subject and really interesting content matter, which isn't really implemented in a way that is received well or that really sits with somebody. And so I think we've got our concepts there. We have the fact that environmental education is mandatory, already working for us in India, but it's more about making it interesting, making the implementation side of things a little less drab, and also making it a lot more content specific. I think, we need to know that giraffes and kangaroos exist in the world, but not make kids believe that it's in their backyards in India. So I think that's something, that really needs to be altered a little bit.
Okay. And kind of taking that forward, I think all of us on this discussion come from very different backgrounds. We've worked in very different countries, right? And so, if you'd like to just kind of address how working in an urban setting versus a rural setting versus some places where we work in really remote areas where people almost have access to nothing, and so how do you kind of implement and design programs for these different contexts? Want to jump?
So if I could take a shot at it, right?
Yeah.
So urban versus rural in India, there's a stark difference, right? And it differs through your socioeconomic ladder as well, right? When you have kids going to an international school versus kids going to a government school, their exposure to environmental studies, as Ishika pointed out, is very different. Though the curriculum might be the same, the kind of the engagement from a teacher's end differs. How a teacher would teach kids going to an international school versus a teacher teaching in a government school. Having said that, though, the kids coming from rural wildlife areas come from a rich sort of local knowledge. And I think it's important we keep that local knowledge and we tap into their sort of native understanding of the ecosystem and contextualize education to that, right? Maybe what we should be doing in Assam in an environmental studies class is very different from what a kid in Karnataka needs to learn,
Yeah.
If anybody wants to sort of talk about something around this.
Ishika, what do you think from our work with the Chalet program? We have examples of doing things that work in different languages in different cultures, but we also have things that won't work in different places, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think there's also a difference in the level of content you take to the children from a rural background versus an urban background. So a lot of our work has been in the rural context, and like Amrutha said, one great thing is that these children already have a connect with that. With the local wildlife and biodiversity. So very often they're familiar with it, but perhaps don't know enough about the wildlife, but they've seen it. So they're not disconnected from it. But the disconnect is extremely stark when you go into an urban space. So just to draw a parallel, comparison of sorts from the work we did with Shali, was about some years ago when I was doing some outreach with marine biology in Goa, for example, in urban schools there. I had a whole plan to teach them about the intricacies of the coral reefs and the species there. But I got cut short even before I began because kids were just amazed that somebody had gone underwater and taken photographs looking at my cover slide. And I realized that that's how stark the disconnect was. And so the place you have to begin with is very different, based on how connected kids are, how old they are, how much they already know. So I think that's something that comes with trial and error. And now we've been through 3 different phases of improving the curriculum. And for sure, every time I create new content, at least 10 to 15% of it comes back having not worked at all. And then you have to build it up again. So I think there's a lot of trial and error involved. And you need to know your audience and the students you're going to really well before you do something really wide scale.
Yeah. Morena, you were involved in a very large environmental education program in Brazil. I'd love to hear more about that program as well and what it accomplished and focused on.
Yeah, so this program was about, it was focused on, I guess, teaching children about the importance of aquatic ecosystem services. And it was a partnership with 2 companies, one called Art Unlimited and the other one called Umiharu. And it was a wonderful program as well, because we were thinking about, we decided to engage these children through art and play, right? So in a way similar to Wild Chalet, the kids weren't being taught material, like, necessarily in lectures. It was, there's lots of activities that they did. And I think Ishika and Amrutha were like hitting the nail on the head when they're saying that I guess the education program needs to be tailored both to the audience's natural environment, right, to their local context. And I think that's something that's really important, that if we're learning about the environment, we should learn. It's good to learn about I guess the global issues, but it's also very, very important that we learn about our own environment, right? So what's specific to like the places where we live. So in Brazil, it would be about the Atlantic forest or the Amazon or the Cerrado, right? And also trying to making sure that you're considering people's culture when you're considering when you're developing this program, not only their culture actually, but their circumstance and their opportunities to learn. And I think that's become incredibly apparent even within the UK in these COVID times, where suddenly everybody had to move to online education. Some kids didn't have access to online education. So every step, I guess, when you're thinking about your program and even just thinking about 30 kids or a class, you really need to think hard about how are these people going to access that information? How are they going to process it? What are the links of the content that you're giving them to their lives, right? So they can actually take action within their lives if they want to.
Great. And before we get to the online education component, 2 things that I want to also ask is, Amrutha, our sort of standard modus operandi has been rote memorization, right? And environmental education, so much of it ends up being experiential. You have to go out there and do something and break this culture of memorizing things, right? So having been a teacher who's kind of done this, I'd like to hear more from your side of what are the challenges you face with rote memorization, and how were you able to kind of overcome that?
I think the first is just the internalization about, we learned that way and we need to break it, right? Like, and teachers teach how they learned. So it's not going to be easy. And having been a teacher and now in the space of teacher training, I see how teachers are conditioned through the system and through their own challenges, and rote memorization is the easy way out, right? But I think there is enough sort of discussion and talking around the space, and there are big players who are working to break this. And technology definitely is a huge component to help change this paradigm. And having said that, like Meghshala, where I work right now, focuses our sort of base is to change that, to change rote memorization. And we equip teachers by providing them content and resources that allow them to engage children. One of the reasons why teachers also sort of rely on rote memorization is because they don't have the sort of knowledge or the skills or the expertise to engage kids through the different subjects, right? So with the work that we do, we provide her resources for the 40 minutes to ensure that 40 minutes is focused on active participation. There's more students talking. At the end of the lesson, there is some sort of an activity that goes back to the local community, right? And one way to do this is also to do this across subjects, not teach mathematics as a standalone program, but as I mentioned, put environmental education across math, across science. How do you talk about numbers to elephants being killed? And that's something that we did in our subtraction lessons. We said, this was the number of elephants in 1991, and this is the number of elephants in 2000. And when you do it subtly like this, I think these concepts hit harder, rather than giving them a 1-hour lecture on we need to protect wildlife.
Yeah. Martha, I'd also love to hear about, what are the different kinds of things you've seen people do to particularly get kids out of a classroom and get out there and feel nature before they can start to fall in love with it, right? Please tell us more.
Yeah, I think the kinds of things that everybody has mentioned are really important. It's important for the information to be local and relevant and meaningful, and kids to be interested in what they're doing. It's also important for the learning to be experiential, for people to be engaged in the concept, which might mean going outside and doing something in the schoolyard or even farther away. But there's also ways to be experiential in the classroom. Small group discussions, for example, can help bring students can help them focus on an issue or a topic and talk about it, engage with it, experiment with it. Science classrooms do this all the time with laboratories and experiments. That's experiential education too. The other half of what makes experiential learning effective is that there's reflection and thinking and discussion about the experience. So it's one thing to go outside and do something fun, but then teachers need to bring that information back and focus the kids on those ideas to make sure that everybody got the same information, for one thing, and then to use it and expand it and process it, generalize it, and apply it to something else, a new circumstance or situation. We did some work in climate change for high school kids, and it was a regional program, so we weren't doing the education with the classrooms. We were providing resources for teachers. And that made it one step harder because the teachers know the kids and the culture and the nuances of what is going to be appropriate for their learning, and we didn't. So we needed to empower the teachers to make decisions and choices in curriculum that had opportunities for them to select different ideas. But it worked out quite effectively, I think, because teachers wanted to teach about climate. They didn't know how. They needed some resources that wouldn't make kids shut down. I mean, you can't have some kids go home to tell parents, oh, we learned about climate, and the parents saying it's not changing. We don't want kids to be caught in the middle. So some information that was less controversial, but important and informative, and then some ways kids could be engaged, things kids could do related to climate. And all those things were important.
Morena and Ishika, I see you guys like nodding your heads. I want to hear those stories that you've seen work.
That we've seen work in terms of environmental education.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, so I was just thinking about the I guess the idea of engaging students with with problems and problem solving, and you know, while we're trying to I think it's important to think that we're not trying to get students to rote learn, right? What we're trying to do is really to get people to learn how to think critically and problem solve. And if they can do that, then we're miles ahead in the environmental agenda or in the environmental world, because doing things that are positive for the environment are positive for the world, are positive, right? So yeah, so I think it's just, I think that I think the thing to emphasize that Martha was saying is just the importance of this I guess focusing on problem solving and critical thinking, and just yeah, making material that is really speaks to the student. A lot of the experience that I have comes from actually teaching master's students that are interested in the environmental area, and I always try to get the students to engage with something that they're interested in, right? And then I try to teach them the problem solving skills within that context, as opposed to giving them a case study. They can choose the case study, and then you work on top of that, and I think that's very effective.
Ishika, what about you?
I think a lot of my vigorous nodding came from, agreeing very strongly with a couple of things which Martha brought up, which I think are so important. One of them is teacher training, where just like she said, we don't always have a direct connect with the students that we want to take and build content for, and but there are already so many teachers and practitioners who want to do better, but who either don't have the resources or don't know exactly how to approach certain topics, and then stick to their comfort zones. So I think it's also a very exciting process and experience for content creators and people like us to engage with people who are already teachers and have some of those training programs where we can actually take some activities, whether they are in class or out class activities, to a bunch of teachers, teach them as though they were students, so that they know how to take that further to kids. And I think that's something that's worked brilliantly for us with training educators who either work with CWS or how having them interact with local school teachers in rural areas. It also brings to mind a couple of other workshops, I've helped with, like, for example, where once we interacted with a wide group of teachers in Bangalore to tell them how to explain to children about overfishing and things like that, using a cardboard box and a bunch of little fish. And we taught them how to do the activity, and they felt so happy and so empowered, and they learned so much through the training about the environment as well. So it is quite genuinely like teaching children, even when you engage with educators who really want to learn a lot more about a certain subject and take it further to kids. And the second thing was about, taking topics back home to your parents. I think it's also important when you do these programs to leave kids with a little, these conversation starters that let them go home, instigate questions from family, make them talk about things they learn in class, which they may or may not do otherwise. And in as much of a non-controversial way as possible, just like Martha said, so that kids aren't caught in conflict between, what is locally believed versus the science of things. And
Great.
yeah, I think those are good challenges.
Thank you. Amrutha, I want to ask you this question now, which is, we've kind of been pushed into rapidly getting into online education, whether people want to do it or not. Because of the COVID pandemic, a lot of schools across the world had to immediately switch into online education, whether it was master's programs, PhD programs, school programs, right? And given how we've kind of gotten into this of how experiential it has to be, and working with teachers and empowering them, how do we do this in a way that it's effective online? And I think we could have a huge debate on how much you can accomplish or not, but I'd really love to hear your thoughts about this.
It's difficult, Krithi. Honestly, way too many challenges in a country like India to be facing this at this time, you know, and more so in the government schooling space. The infrastructure does not exist, right? I still see my friends and the kids are on Zoom calls because they have that sort of an atmosphere back at home, and they have teachers who know technology. But with Mekshala, I work with government school teachers, and I know they are first generation technology learners themselves, right? Our sort of intervention within India is two-pronged. Like, how do you equip a teacher to get used to technology and then ensure that the learning at home also happens with the infrastructure available? To your question around experiential learning and work and doing this from home, I, I think we learn as we go. I think teachers will get creative. They have to find solutions. And I saw something fantastic come up during this COVID, right? Right now, so sorry, that's my kid crying. Apologies for that. He had a phone and he had a lesson plan that we had given him, and he said, I can't teach this to a class right now, but what I can do is I can videotape myself teaching it on top of that screen and share that to my parents' WhatsApp group. So there's still learning that continued, but again, what was missing was the interaction between teachers and students. But I'm sure that, you know, give it some time. I think teachers will come up with ways of working around this as well. We're creative human beings. I think we just need some time to figure this out a little.
Well, Martha and Morena, you're both professors, and I'm assuming midway through semester had to switch very rapidly to online teaching for adults, right? And what was that like, and how were you able to do that?
Martha,
Well,
do you wanna?
Go ahead.
No, you. Well, so I guess. Well, it was challenging, but I think it. But I also like some of. Well, where I teach at Imperial College London, which is the students have online access. Like so the issue with accessibility to online resources for the students didn't exist. And also generally the teachers are very used to speaking on platforms such as Zoom or Teams or whatever else, but still it was challenging. But I do love the opportunities that it brings. So I feel that there's, in a way, while it's it seems to make us further away from our students and our peers because we're all kind of stuck in our own home. Like, we're having this conversation between UK, the US, and India, and so it gives allows for opportunities to bring minds that you generally wouldn't be able to bring into your classroom to contribute to the discussion. So it was challenging, but I think there's lots of opportunities there, and there's lots of brilliant software designers creating new tools all the time. So yeah, so I'm actually positive about it, yeah, as opposed to negative.
Martha?
One thing we did, it was a large class that I was teaching last spring, so 80 students, and it was primarily lecture driven. But when we were all in the classroom, we had opportunities to work together in small groups and do worksheets and answer questions. And so we repeated that on Zoom. We used Zoom to assign people to small groups, and we gave them discussion questions, and then we had them report back out to the big group. So we tried to keep it as engaging as possible, even though everybody was in their pajamas on their back porch, whatever. And one thing that was challenging as an educator is that people didn't use their video connection. They were just like what we're seeing right now. It was just names on the screen. And so you never really knew who you were talking to. And so I like getting some feedback as I teach, and it was harder for me to do that in this environment. But then not everybody had enough bandwidth to enable them to put their video on. So, oh, look, people are out there. Thank you. So yeah, we're learning. The system is changing, and we're learning, and we're getting new tools. And I think we're learning how to be students also. So everybody's learning.
And I think one of the things fundamentally as humans is we kind of thrive off facial expressions, hearing tone of voice. And as great as video conferencing is, and it's brought us all together today, there's still an energy and an adrenaline jump that comes from being in a room with a human being, right? And that can lead to
right. And now we're going to have conversations with people with masks on, so we'll only be able to see their eyes to get their expressions.
Yeah, great. So I had somebody ask a question, which I think, being scientists in the group, we'd like to know. Many people don't do evaluations. They don't do evaluations to look at what's working, what's not working. And I'd like both Morena and you to kind of address why evaluation is important. What can you evaluate? When should you evaluate?
So evaluation is really important. I think that people are afraid of evaluation because they feel like it's going to be negative about their ability. And I think we need to change the mentality around evaluation so that we think of it as ideas and suggestions for making improvements, telling us what we're doing well and showing us where we might be able to tweak things and make them better. So if we go into it with the attitude of, I'm going to learn something and it's going to get better, and then it makes it a whole lot easier to think about evaluation. One thing that's key, I think, that perhaps Morena mentioned earlier, is that we pay attention to what the goals and objectives are. It's not fair to evaluate a program that we think is reaching a certain goal if the program never intended to do that. And so it needs to be specific to that educational enterprise, and the enterprise needs to be designed in order to actually meet those goals. So it needs to all be lined up so that we have these objectives. The education is designed to meet those objectives. We ask the evaluation to tell us how well it did that. And did it do it for some people better than other people? Is there variation in the system that we could use to better understand how everyone can learn? And that also suggests that we pay attention to the knowledge, the attitudes, and the skills, so that we're looking at evaluation in all three dimensions. So that's a start, but we can keep on going with other people.
Yeah, well, so honestly, I believe we need to evaluate everything we do, which is actually meant to achieve something. So, and we evaluate everything all the time. Like if we cook a meal, when we're eating it, we're evaluating how well it's tasted or how healthy it is, right? So we have these different measures that we will attribute to the goals of our cooking, right? In the same way, when we're doing environmental education, I think evaluating is critical, because otherwise we don't really know whether we're achieving our goals, or maybe we might be changing the system or causing impacts that were never really intended, and they might actually be counterproductive. So I think it's really, really important that we evaluate every single education program that we create. So that doesn't necessarily mean, like, basically we're quantifying absolutely everything that we can in the program. Our evaluation costs money, right? And it requires resources. So you have to be really specific about your goals, your objectives, and what are you actually going to measure to basically measure the progress that you're on towards those objectives. I think that the reason that people don't evaluate this much is because of this fear of failure. But the reality is we're all learning, and if we start learning together and we start talking about when things don't work well as when things work well, we're all going to learn much quicker and be much more effective at what we do.
Great. Ishika, do you want to talk a little bit about things? Our collaborator Gabby Salazar, who designed the Wild Chalet program with us, is not here on the call, but the things, we kind of struggled with evaluation, and, what worked in an Indian context doesn't work in a US context. Maybe do we over-evaluate, under-evaluate? How do you figure out, how to set this up?
Yeah, no, I think we've actually learned so much from the trial and error of evaluation we've done. So, like you mentioned, Krithi, Gabby is somebody who, really played a big role in designing that first round of evaluation tools in 2018. And what also happened was, going back to children's contexts and the cultures that they come from, even something as simple as what kind of question they are best equipped to answer, whether they are equipped to answer an open-ended question, whether you'd rather take down evaluation in person, ask them to tick off a multiple choice question, give them a scale along which to answer preferences and things like that. I mean, there are so many options and ways in which you can evaluate the same thing just for this, like, to understand if you've reached a goal. But a lot of that also depends on what the children or adults, depending on your demography, what they understand best and what they're most comfortable answering. It needs to be simple enough for them to properly understand what you're asking of them, and then for you to be able to translate that into actual analysis and feedback. So I think we've, played around a whole lot with qualitative and quantitative analyses, trying to do direct surveys with them where they note down multiple choice questions before and after the program to see how well it's done. We've also tried giving them open-ended questions. We've done in-person interviews. We've also done some passive evaluation where, during an activity, we note down children's responses without them directly knowing that they're being evaluated, so they're not conscious of the way in which they participate in various activities. And I think what we've ended up with right now is the fact that we really need to use a mixture of qualitative and quantitative approaches to properly understand how well a program is doing. I think most cultural contexts are not uniform. Any classroom you go to or any group of people you approach is usually a diverse community of people coming from various backgrounds, various households, and their ability to learn and absorb is also different. So like Martha was saying, it's really important to understand the variation that you're going after and the variation you need to cover with your curriculum. So being able to do some evaluation on the go, no matter how simple, is really important, so that you can modify your program to reach that entire variation that exists in the people you're reaching.
So something we've not really spent too much time talking about today, but we've kind of gone in on the children's side of the story, right? But ideally, environmental education is something that should be carried through people's lives in some form, right? You may start in school, you may start in college, you may start as a university professor, and how do we kind of differentiate environmental education for different age groups? How do you kind of transition this so that it stays with people through their lives? Martha, any thoughts?
Back when we learned about curriculum a long time ago, for me, the rule was that ideas keep circulating, that education is a spiral, and that the concepts keep being repeated over and over again, and they evolve and they grow each time they circle back around. And so I think in K-12 education, that is fairly typical still, that kids learn about organisms and then food chains and then ecosystems, and they're still reflecting what they learned about organisms as they expand those concepts. So that's certainly one way we keep the educational system coherent, that there's a plan, there's a bigger idea about how concepts grow over time. But skills also grow over time, and I think it's important that we keep introducing new skills and helping kids get better and better at old skills as we continue to ask them to communicate and share and explore and do critical thinking and investigate and analyze and judge and work in small groups to achieve a goal. Not when kids work in small groups, there's one person that's a leader. But for everybody to learn leadership skills, they have to keep working in small groups over and over and over again, so that task can rotate through all the kids. And so that's repetition. That's doing things again and again. And that's not a bad thing, because I think we keep learning more as we cycle through in this spiral. Once kids get to high school and college, that coherence might disappear. But that's because they're starting to focus on what they care about. They're taking required courses so that they can get a degree or they can go do the career they want. And then it's their interest that's carrying them through and helping to be the spark that inspires them to be learning and putting new ideas together. What we don't do as good a job at is the interdisciplinary work of, real environmental problems have policy connections and cultural connections and science frameworks, and you need a mix of many disciplines in order to think about how to solve a problem. And so that means either students need to learn lots of different things, or, and probably "and" is the better word there, they need to work together with people who have other kinds of expertise. And that's how we keep learning and growing.
Morena?
Yeah, so I think just building on what Martha was saying, I think a lot of the education now for university students, there's a big focus on active learning and problem solving and critical thinking, and that to me is where these where you bring information together from the social sciences and medicine and ecological information and engineering tools and that kind of thing, and that's where everything kind of comes together. And I think it's having this interdisciplinary approach is critical to to solve environmental problems. And I think it's critical to any university or master's program or PhD program where you're trying to equip adults to progress to environmental careers.
Thank you. So I think this might come as a hard question, but how do you think you guys, how are we doing? We've spent so much time and money in investing in environmental education programs, many NGOs involved in this, many universities involved in this. The massive number of environmental programs, like we could have a conversation of just on climate change. We could just have a conversation on wildlife trade and hunting. We could have another conversation on air pollution. Given the wide variety of environmental problems that we see in the world today, what is your perspective on how we're doing in terms of addressing some of these problems through environmental education? And I'd like to start with Amrutha on this one, because for a country like ours, this size, to engage children to care about the environment, it doesn't have to be all issues, even one environmental issue, and make kind of fundamental changes to how we live our lives and move forward. I think there's no better time than now to actually reflect upon that, right? So.
Oh, she's muted again.
Yeah. I honestly feel we're doing better. I think as humanity, as a human species, we're talking about these issues a lot more. There's a lot more awareness. People are more conscious. Having said that, I think the education curriculum is still a little outdated, I feel. I think, and as Martha pointed out, it is an interdisciplinary effort. The curriculum has to change at a policy level. That needs to trickle down into your textbooks. And then we work to provide resources to support teachers to engage with the curriculum. But going back to what I was saying, there are people who are doing good work, maybe in smaller pockets. I think we need to amplify these voices and the work that we're doing to make that dent. But I'm not disheartened. Just taking the example of the wildlife, the human wildlife conflict that happened 2 days ago about the elephant. It was heart wrenching, but I think people are talking about it. There is exposure, and I mean, we can debate about this a lot more, but at least it's a start.
Thanks. Morena?
Yeah, so I think I agree that we're doing better, but I think we could do much better. And I think we can, so the number of environmental education programs that you see out there that have no evaluation is like that's the majority of the environmental educations out there, education programs out there. And sometimes when they are evaluated, the only thing that they're evaluated on is environmental literacy, as opposed to attitudes or all these other concepts which are a bit harder to grasp at, but which are critical as well. So I think we need to do better, and I think we can do better. We have the tools to do so, and we just need to basically align the great thinkers on this with the tools and the funding, and we're ready to go. Like, we know how to do this, we just need to do it.
Great. Ishika?
So, I think, I think there's general optimism about the direction we are heading in, which is great. I think with a lot of environmental education, especially with the younger generations, what we really need is a lot of patience. I think a lot of what we're doing now, we'll start seeing payoffs or responses to having grown up with this kind of awareness and education a couple of generations down the line, say 10 years, 20 years. And apart from doing immediate pre and post evaluations for a lot of programs, we also need to start going back and evaluating how well that content and information we give them sticks in the long term, because I think that's what will start separating the reach we have in terms of just say the number of schools we go to or the number of students we reach, or or anything like that. I mean, that tells you where you've gone, but it doesn't really tell you what you've achieved. You have to really start separating your reach from the impact you're creating. So and I think just like most conservation efforts, you may reach technically 100 people but truly impact 5 who go on to make a difference. So I think that's something we also need some patience for, to see how well we're doing. I think we won't get any really immediate results always with a lot of these things.
Great, we're down to our last few minutes, and I have a question that I want actually all of you to answer, in terms of, if there's one thing each of you would do to scale environmental education, what would that one thing be? Can we start with you, Martha?
I would develop educational materials that convey hope and efficacy, so that people feel empowered to make a difference and believe they can.
Thank you. Amrutha?
I think I would want to localize environmental education. Right now, it's a one shoe fit all, and it's not taking us too far. I think I would want to democratize that to, as we spoke about, region specific, geography specific. It's good to know about kangaroos and giraffes, as Ishika mentioned, but I think it'll be more relevant for kids if it's more about their surroundings. So, yeah.
Ishika? Ishika? I don't think she can hear me.
Yeah, I think if I could do one thing, it would be to try and bridge the disconnect we have from the environment at this point. I think we right now, by creating this image of environmental education being boring yet compulsory that we have from school all the way up to college. Even though I'm someone who's really interested in wildlife, I used to opt out of my compulsory environmental education classes in my undergrad and things like that because they just weren't fun. So I think it's about bridging the disconnect from a school level, because that's what will really make you want to go back to these classes later.
Thank you. Morena, last word.
Last one. Well, I agree with all these points, but I think one of the things that I'm really passionate at the moment is about trying to really create material and educational experiences that can be accessed by everyone, right? As opposed to just material or content that's accessed by the elites of different societies. So I think it's really, again, about democratizing environmental education and creating things that people from all walks of life can connect to and can work with to inform their own actions.
Great. So I think we're out of time. I think there's a lot more questions, but I'm hoping people will reach out to each of you directly, and some collaborations and partnerships come out from this conversation. We've loved working with every single one of you, and we hope to continue to work with all of you as well. And thank you for making time on a Saturday to do this. And stay well, be safe, be healthy, and I hope we can do a lot more for environmental education around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you for organizing this.
And thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. And thanks everyone who watched. Thank you so much.
Bye.